Welcome to the podcast. We're diving into a discussion on economic strategies where the West's economic war on China and Russia seems to be backfiring in a major way.
Yep, right. So, what we're looking at is an analysis by Sean Fu, who, as a financial analyst and China expert, explains how the current tactics aimed at subduing these nations are actually like creating unintended collapses in the West's own economic fabric.
Exactly. And it's interesting because instead of maintaining their leverage, the West's focus on a financialized economy, one that's very detached from the physical production side, ends up showing serious
Yeah.
cracks.
So, what's the core of Fu's argument? Is it that the West's economic war is basically misfiring by underestimating how robust the industrial economies of China, Russia, and the BRICS nations are?
Precisely. Fu points out that these nations are heavily reliant on physical industrial economic strengths. They're bypassing the middlemen that the West's financialized systems depend on, and that leads to, well, disruptions in global trade and finance.
Right? And that means that while the West is busy enforcing sanctions and restrictions, it's inadvertently weakening its own base, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of feels like a self inflicted wound. The Western economies try to pressure China and Russia by using their control over finance. But these industrial nations are moving around that pressure by focusing on, the production side, like totally bypassing the usual financial intermediaries.
That's a fascinating reversal. I mean, usually when we think of economic sanctions, it's assumed that the pressure will hurt the targeted country the most. But here, the unexpected twist is that the sanctions are starting to bounce back.
Right, it's like a boomerang effect. The West's strategy, which relies heavily on sophisticated financial networks, ends up leaving them vulnerable to the very physical economic shifts that they ignored.
Yeah, really intriguing. And Sean Fu really drives that point by discussing the industrial versus financial economy dichotomy, doesn't he?
Exactly. Think about it. It's like imagine building an elaborate digital fortress while ignoring the physical foundations of your home. The BRICS nations, especially China and Russia, have continued to invest in tangible industrial capacity, like manufacturing and energy production, while the West is more preoccupied with financial markets and instruments.
Yeah, I see that. But isn't there an argument that the West's financial systems can adapt and eventually mitigate these issues? I mean, couldn't innovation or regulatory changes turn the tide in favor of financialized economies?
That's a good question, but Fu seems to challenge that notion. He suggests that the pace at which industrial nations are evolving is simply too fast for Western financial infrastructures to keep up.
Right, I get that. So, in other words, while there might be some hope in innovation, the fundamental imbalance is already causing significant economic disruptions on the Western side.
Exactly, and there's an urgency in his tone, like, how can the West continue this aggressive economic stance when even its own allies might be indirectly affected? It's almost as if their own economic leverage is evaporating.
Absolutely. Interesting. And Fu also mentions that this isn't just about sanctions. It's about a broader strategy of economic warfare that, in some ways, is undermining the Western industrial base itself, right?
Yes. It's more than just a few sanctions here and there. It's a systematic approach that, by trying to isolate key players like China and Russia through financial means, ends up neglecting the very tangible aspects of production and physical trade.
Yep.
To give an analogy, it's like the West is betting on a high tech solution to a problem that requires a very hands on brick and mortar approach. The industrial players are, simply moving past those financial choke points.
That analogy really hits home. But here's where I respectfully challenge a bit. Couldn't one argue that financialized economies have an inherent flexibility that industrial ones might lack, especially in times of rapid global shifts?
That's a fair point, but Fu counters that by saying, while financial economies can pivot quickly in theory and practice, they're increasingly entangled with global systems that are now shifting away from those very financial conduits. It's like they're caught in a loop where innovation in one area is undermined by the very tools they rely on.
Yeah, I get that. And it's the bypassing of intermediaries. You mentioned that earlier. That really catches my attention. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. So the idea is that industrial economies in China, Russia, and, well, other BRICS states are making direct deals and investments. They don't depend as much on, conventional Western banks or financial instruments that are susceptible to sanctions.
Right? So they're, in a sense, sidestepping the middlemen that the West has so heavily invested in, which means that the financial pressure isn't cascading effectively as intended.
Exactly, yeah. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The watertight part of Fu's argument is that this strategy doesn't just harm the target economies, it also precipitates a kind of economic self sabotage among Western nations which over relied on the same model.
That's the crux of it. That's a bit worrying, isn't it? I mean, if you're undermining your own economic structure by enforcing these policies, then clearly the strategy might need reevaluation.
Absolutely, it's like setting up your own dominoes to fall. Once the first piece topples, you've got a chain reaction. The West's current configuration might very well be contributing to a collapse scenario that they didn't foresee.
Yeah, I see the risk there. And if we look at it from a global perspective, this could reshape international alliances and economic power balances. China and Russia, by sidestepping the financial middlemen, might form stronger, more resilient trade relationships among themselves and with other emerging economies.
Spot on. Exactly. And that, in turn, could lead to a sort of bifurcation of the global economy. On one side, you've got Western nations wrapped up in a network of fragile financial dependencies, and on the other side, these industrial powerhouses building robust, self
Yeah,
sustaining
that's a real
systems.
possibility. It almost feels like we're witnessing the birth of two divergent economic models, each with its own set of strengths and weaknesses. Would you say that's an accurate read?
Definitely. The model practiced by the West, heavily influenced by financial engineering, faces a critical stress test right now. Meanwhile, the industrial, production focused approaches, although maybe not as flashy in the short term, are proving surprisingly
Right, that's a
resilient.
compelling insight.
And let's be honest, it really challenges the narrative that high tech financial solutions are always superior. I mean, it's like relying too much on a touchscreen instead of having the physical controls in a
Haha,
car.
exactly, like having backup wheels. That's a funny but accurate analogy. Also, don't you think that this mix of industrial and financial strategies might be more complementary if done right? I mean, aren't there scenarios where integration of both models has worked?
You're right, integration can be powerful. But in this case, Fu is pointing out that the current Western approach is overly skewed towards the financial sector, and that distortion is what's fueling the backfire.
Well said. So, if the West rebalances its focus or recalibrates its policies, could it potentially avoid this collapse scenario, or is it too deeply entrenched?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? Fu seems to be saying that unless there's a significant policy shift, like refocusing on industrial resilience, the risks are too high. The current trend suggests that the backlash isn't something that can be easily reversed with minor adjustments.
True, that makes sense.
And what's more, the analysis challenges us to rethink our conventional wisdom about economic warfare. It's not just about punishing a competitor, it's also about maintaining your own structural integrity.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely gives policymakers a lot to chew on. If the strategy is, in fact, self defeating, then a whole new approach might be necessary to maintain global balance.
Exactly. The takeaway is that economic strategies need to be holistic. You can't just focus on the financial instruments and ignore the underlying physical economy. Otherwise, you risk a backlash that undermines your own economic
Very
stability.
true. And that wraps up our deep dive. It's a complex topic with major implications, almost like watching the unintended consequences of a grand economic chess game unfold.
Right. And it reminds us that in the world of global economics, every move has consequences. Thanks for riding through these insights. It's been enlightening.